Morning, everybody. I'll call the meeting to order and make the following statement. I begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. The panel today, on my left is Mark Beretsky, on my far left is Richard Whitbread. I'm Robert Buss, the chair. The assessor today is Kem Wong, and our recording secretary is Michelle Mipin. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the other applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be a part of the public record. And we will begin with item number 1 on the docket today, 340 Princess Street.
Chair, this morning, or can you state your full name, please?
Kem Wong.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Can you state your full name, please?
Trevor Glenn Smith.
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. 570 was,
I'll look, and there's nothing in the file, I'll just get you forward and check it.
Okay, I noticed on the first property that we've got liability to taxation and classification of property as well. Is there anything special about this? It's the only one that has.
you can give me a moment. No, when the appeals were filed by the client, in some cases they filed for exemption as well as classification, just as a protective measure.
Good, thank you. Mr. Wong, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
The subject property is 340 Princess. The roll number is 130-920-81000. It's owned by Manitoba Housing Community Renewal Corporation. It's a residential apartment building. It's 6 stories high. It's built in 1990. It has 60 suites with 16 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $722 to get an effective, get a potential income of $485,000. We use the 3% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $470,000. And use a 55% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $209,000. Kept at 5% to have an estimated market value of $4,192,000, which equals $74,000 per unit. On page 4 are rent comparables. Shows that the rents we've used are in line with what's on the market, maybe a little bit below. At the bottom of page 4, some expense comparables showing that the expenses that we've used are a little bit lower than what's in the marketplace. Or the expenses that we use are actually a little bit higher than what's in the marketplace. The model is at about 55%. On page 5 is information on how we derived our cap rates. We have cap rates ranging from 4 to 7.3%, with the majority of them falling between 4.9 and 5.3%. On page 7 are some pictures of the subject property. With its location. On page 8 is the income statements provided by the owner. This is affordable housing, so the income and the expenses are not representative of market, but this is what amount of the housing submitted to us. On the last page are the market rents from CMHC. The average rent for the subject property for the unit mix is $829, and the model is applied a lesser rate of $722. We're trying to determine market value here, and trying to use sort of affordable housing financial information to try to estimate a value will probably lead to inaccurate estimates of value. We've treated this property as if it were a below average property. The rents that we've applied are below average, are lower than average, and also the expenses that the model is applied is higher than average, and the cap rate that we've applied is in line with similar buildings, like for a 1990 building, and so I feel that the model is supported by the market and as they maintain the assessed value at $4,192,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith, any questions of the assessor?
Yes, just a few. The market value today, this is all model-driven parameters?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And the rental rate that's arrived at and applied, that would probably be heavily influenced by the build date in 1990. Is that fair to say?
Probably the year built and the size of the building.
Okay. Looking at the expense on your page number 4, there's a chart at the bottom there with expense comparables.
Yes.
So I was just glancing at those, and so the income the income for those per year ranges between 1.5 and 4.5 million roughly. So these would be probably some of the larger apartment complexes in the city. Is that fair to say? I'm familiar with some of them, Setter, Niagara.
It would be larger than the subject.
Okay. And sorry, just a moment. I think that is all of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Beretsky, questions?
Yes. The vacancy rate that you have is 3%?
Yes.
And is that just typical of market buildings, or is that typical of public housing complexes?
The market.
That's market.
Yeah.
And is there any difference between public housing versus normal rental apartments when it comes to vacancy?
I'm not totally sure. But I think what we're trying to get at is market value, and so the market vacancy that we applied is, I feel that's what we're going after. With regards to vacancy for housing projects, I'm actually not very familiar with them. I have a coworker I've had discussions about it, and it seems like, actually, you know what, I don't have very much information on housing vacancy rates.
But this is normal market that you've selected,
Yes.
though the expense rate is higher than what there would be. Is that what you're telling us?
It's a little bit higher than, it's on the higher end of the range.
Higher end of the range, okay. And the examples, the 4 examples, expense comparables on page 4, are those public housing or not public housing?
They're not public housing, they're market apartment buildings.
So you're saying that the expense ratio is higher than, or it's at the high end of the range.
Well, actually, that
And
might be
what-
not the best, it's higher than average, I would say.
What might that average be?
Be about 50%.
About 50, so this is just marginally higher. And the cap rate is purely what you would expect from a rental block of this size, of this age, condition, et cetera.
Yes.
Okay. Do the public housing complexes like this, you've given it a slightly higher expense ratio. What is that attributable to? These are more difficult to maintain,
From what I've observed, it seems like there's more wear and tear. They do, like you say, they are a little bit more difficult to maintain, and so we've tried to reflect that as best as we can.
Okay. And that difficulty in maintaining it, you're only reflecting in the expense rate, you're not reflecting that in the cap rate, in the vacancy.
With regards to the vacancy, no, but we are reflecting it in the rent and the expenses, like the lower rents.
Okay, I'm just thinking of the expense side, not the booking side. Okay, those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread?
Did you inspect the building?
I have not inspected the building.
So what do you base your below average comment on?
I guess from some of my observations of affordable housing properties, I have seen them to experience more wear and tear, and that is what I base it on. Okay. Yeah.
So with regard to this particular building, it's difficult for you to say with any degree of accuracy that it is below average, average, or above average?
It would be difficult for me to say.
Okay. Because I know they're spending $140,000, $150,000 a year on repair and maintenance, which is
Yeah,
nothing to sneeze at.
Well, that's kind of, even, it seems like when I see Manitoba Housing income statements, they do seem to put a reasonable amount of money into it at the same time. Like I said, with some of the affordable housing properties that I've seen, it looks like it's more worn than your average
Yeah,
building.
we've heard that argument, but without inspecting, it's tough to know for sure. Did I hear you say your expense rate is model-driven?
Yes.
And so when you look at an expense item, I'm looking on your page 9, interest, about halfway down in the last section of expenses, $202,000.
Yeah.
Does that seem like a significant amount of interest in a building that's 30 years old? That would say a debt of about $4 million at 3%, roughly.
I guess it seems to fall in line with the assessed value with regards to the actual expenses, the interest being charged. I actually am not very familiar with it. The interest is not usually part of the estimating the net operating income, so that's usually not included in estimating the net operating income. When we put our income and expense information in, we usually exclude the interest or mortgage expense that some people put into their income statements.
Okay, so you can't say whether that's a real number or a made number.
Oh, it would be very difficult to determine if these like how these numbers are associated with the particular subject property. I mean, if it was just a standard apartment building, I could probably say, yeah, that's contributed to the building. But this one, I'm not really too, because they have such a large portfolio of properties.
Yes.
I'm not even too sure like how this.
Okay, it may be my unfamiliarity with how they structure these, and maybe I can ask the same question of Mr. Smith when we get him in front of us and see if he knows. But I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
That's your questions. I have one question. On the last page, page 10, the average market rent, $829. Is that general market? Much like Mr. Beretsky's question on the vacancy, etc. Is that from the marketplace, or is that type of CMHC properties, or RHC?
They're market rates
Market rates in that area?
for the Centennial Zone.
Okay. That's all my questions. Mr. Smith, would you like to take us through your information?
Absolutely. I thought maybe we could just address some of the questions that came up from the panel at the beginning here, just to resolve some of those. With regard to, say, the amortization and the interest numbers that are on the financial statement that was supplied by the client, they would be the actuals from the property, but for our purposes of valuing the building, financial leverage, etc., is specifically excluded from any expenses that are attributed in arriving at the net operating income, both by the city and ourselves as a standard matter of theory. So they're not included in any sense in arriving at the net operating income. So those are disregarded. So hopefully that's of help on that front. Just moving on to the property itself. So our task, of course, is to arrive at fair market value for the subject property today. It is a social housing property owned by Manitoba Housing, and it is operated on a rent geared to income basis. So as Mr. Wong had stated, basing anything on the income that they derive from their tenants as a proportion of their income would lead to great inaccuracies in coming up with a market value. So we don't rely in any sense on the income that is generated from the residents of these particular properties, as it would be inaccurate representation of market value. Moving on to the subject property itself, so again, it is a Manitoba housing property. This one was built in 1990, and it's composed entirely of one-bedroom units, 56 one-bedroom units. I'll take you through the photos of the property beginning on page 4. As Mr. Wong had stated there, with regard to social housing and Manitoba housing in particular, you do tend to have greater degrees of wear and tear in these facilities simply because of the segment of the market that their mandate has them serving. You tend to have greater degrees of breakage, just general overall wear, etc. on these facilities. So you tend to have higher operating costs, largely through R&M, repair and maintenance, as you'll see in many of the income statements that are included today and on other days. So the other issue to look at is the nature of the housing that's provided. So Manitoba Housing, when they build these facilities, they build them in areas where the need is present. So they're looking to serve that segment of the population that may not normally be able to afford housing, and located in the areas in which they're generally located. And the housing that they build is of a base nature with hard-wearing surfaces intended to last for a long time, nothing elaborate in terms of the build-out of these units or the size of the units themselves. They're looking to accommodate the most number of people in the space that they have on a socially aware basis. So they're not 10 by 10 units or anything, but they tend to be smaller than your average units in the marketplace. So if you look at the photos beginning on page 4, you can see the property is original to its date of construction in 1990. The surfaces and finishes are of that vintage. You can see the wear, etc. as you look at them. The cabinets are from that time frame. The flooring, as you can see on page 8. This is a fairly good representation of this facility. The site is shown on page number 9, and the location is shown on page number 10. Now, location obviously is critical to value in many ways. Again, we're looking at arriving at fair market value. We're not basing this on the fact that it's social housing. It's what would this property achieve in the marketplace based on all the factors that would be appropriate for value. So location, build out, condition, etc., etc. Looking at the subject property, 340 Princess, we are roughly a block and a half west of the Higgins and Main Street intersection, just south of the CPR track. So while we're in the Centennial neighborhood, it's north Centennial neighborhood against the industrial buildings essentially that are backing onto this and the CPR tracks. And I think we're probably all familiar with the social issues that are present in that particular neighborhood, so I won't go into greater depth there other than to say obviously that has an impact with regard to the desirability of the location and what one could expect to derive as a rent, as well as perhaps potential vacancy if people have the ability to leave their unit for a more desirable location, etc. We're not going to ask for more vacancy, simply a statement in that regard. Moving on to the actual valuation itself. So on page number 12, we have, as we've said, it is rent geared to income in terms of the income basis of the property. So we have to disregard that in our valuation. If you look at the bottom of page number 12, we've given you the CMHC fall 2017 average monthly stats as far as rent for the city, broken out by area. The subject property itself, as I said, it is in the Centennial area. The Centennial area stretches from the Assiniboine River in the south, so south of Broadway, taking up all of that area over slightly into the West Broadway area, and then it stretches northwards up to the CPR tracks there essentially, and across to the Red River, and encompasses quite a large area. Now obviously that includes areas that are considerably denser in terms of build out than the subject area, that South Broadway area, downtown itself, south of Broadway, where you drive significantly greater rents, etc. So your average rent of $829 for the area would not be appropriate for the subject property, and as presented by the city, I think they also recognize that the subject would drive lower rents than that. What we have done on page number 13 is give you a couple of comparables just to give you, to help you frame the rental rate that we've applied. We've given you the Chateau York apartment, which is located at 134 Smith Street, which is the southeast corner of Smith at York, right downtown. Kind of looks like a milk carton, if you're familiar with that property, I'm sure. Very large property located right downtown. At the reference date, they had rents for one bedrooms in that property beginning at $700 per month. If you look at the second property there, 245 Provencher, again, significant building, not as big as the Smith Street property, but certainly comparable in size to the subject. That has one bedrooms at $733 per month. That's located just to that east of the St. Boniface City Hall property, Festival Voyager office property, etc. there, right on Provencher. Both of these would be, in my opinion, significantly better located and better properties than the subject. So while perhaps we could have been marginally lower on the rent that we have applied to the subject, we have applied a rental rate of $700 per month to the subject. This gives us our rental income of $470,400 based on that $700 a month rent. The actual property brought in $232,227 in the financial year. Now that's rent geared to income, obviously, so we're disregarding that. Moving on to vacancy, we've given you the CMHC stats, again on page number 14 at the top there. In the Centennial area, vacancy rate for one beds was 3.5%. We're not going to quibble over the vacancy rate. There's no specific vacancy that is tracked necessarily for Manitoba Housing to be able to present, but this does not mean that they don't have vacancy of people moving in and out and repair to suites, etc., where they have to repair it, which can take a month or 2 months, things of that nature. So their vacancy would typically fall in line with the marketplace, is my experience. On the expense side, we have given you 3 years of the expenses for the subject property and gone through a stabilization exercise for them. So you can see how that's done on the bottom of page number 14 there. Their repair and maintenance, as I mentioned, does tend to be higher because of the wear and tear for these properties. It was between $110,000 and $158,000 for the subject over the prior 3 years. We reduced this to a market level of $1,500 a month. Is that wear and tear there? Yes, it is, but in order to arrive at a fair market value, we're making a reduction. to that expense. The other adjustment that has been made is that there is no property management fee recognized by Manitoba Housing in their income and expense statement. So we've applied the standard 5% of effective gross income as the property management fee. And this gives us our $256,362 stabilized expense allowance. With regard to capitalization rate, we can move on to page number 15. I do know that two of our panel members here today have heard me speak extensively about this. Perhaps Mr. Boreski has not, so I'll try and be very brief on this, and we'll only do it once today with regard to the background of social housing and capitalization rates. So looking at page number 15, there's a lot of text here. I'll try and summarize somewhat. Essentially comparing social housing properties with regard to capitalization rate directly to market apartments is difficult and somewhat inaccurate, as it does not take into account the various risks that one would have in acquiring a social housing property versus a standard market apartment. So if you see the underlined text there, it says social housing, affordable housing cannot legitimately be directly compared to standard market apartment transactions, as social housing properties have considerable restrictions and burdens that are not present for market apartments. These include rental income restrictions, rental market restrictions, smaller pool of potential tenants, additional operating expenses, as already stated, physical condition, deferred maintenance, and then we have issues with regard to disposition as well. You have programs that are in place for those properties, which are intended to carry forward. You have tenancies in place where tenants have the legal right to remain in their units on the basis that they've signed their agreements and leases, so those would carry forward. So essentially, if you're looking at purchasing this property, there's a lot more issues that would have an impact on your return as an investor in acquiring an apartment property. So naturally, intuitively, you would assign a higher capitalization rate to accommodate those risk elements in your purchase of that property. There's, and I believe Mr. Bresky's already heard this in past cycles, so I won't run through it other than to state on page 15, we have an expert, Mr. Richard Poulton, who is an expert in this particular subject of affordable housing and market value. He is an accredited appraiser, and he's written a book on the subject titled Valuation and Market Studies for Affordable Housing. The text that is included here from that particular book can essentially be summed up in the fact, in the final analysis, property tax assessment must take into account the public purpose of the project, overall benefits and burdens, and the restricted nature of the operating rents. So he essentially is acknowledging the text that I've provided above that. So how do we value this then? If we look at market transactions and make adjustments for the additional risk that an investor would be taking on in the purchase of a Manitoba housing or social housing property. So looking at our chart on page number 15, to start, please strike out sale number 2 from your briefs on this property as well as the runs coming up. We've received some additional information that we're looking to verify that would invalidate this sale from inclusion in our study. So please don't take in 430 Young into account. The balance of the properties, these properties were investment sales. They were purchased for the in-place income. They were not purchased for renovation and further increase to the rental rate and the return of the investor. So they were bought for that in-place income and were not then further renovated to change the return to the investor. They won't necessarily be in the same location as the subject or of the same size or necessarily of the same vintage, but this is a good indication of what astute investors are paying in the marketplace with regard to cap rates for apartment properties. So you can see that we have obviously the first property there, 333 Ward. I leave it up to the board to decide how you want to acknowledge this particular sale. It's been talked about very significantly. The purchase price of $18 million divided by the actual NOI derives, I believe, the cap rate of 5.23, 5.25% based on the actual at that time. The purchaser, who is a very astute investor with very significant holdings in this market and others, bought it on the basis of 5.44% based on the efficiencies that they could create in that property, and they've subsequently operated it in that manner.
Which property, sorry?
333 Ward, the first property
Ward,
in the
okay.
chart. The balance of the properties, so that's our newest property, built in 2006, 103 units. It's also the most significant in size and value. Sale date in 2016, we have a cap rate of 5.44 based on how they purchased the property. The balance of our sales are obviously smaller, and they're in that range of 5.5 up to 6.5, 6.6% based on in-place revenue. The main, or two of the main market participants with regard to sales of multifamily properties, Colliers and C.B. Richard Ellis, are essentially stating a flat line with regard to capitalization rates in the Winnipeg market between the 2016 and 2018 cycles. If you look at the Colliers information on page number 16, you can see that they have high-rise apartments at 5 to 5.75% and low-rise apartments at 5.25 to 6% in the 2016 time frame. They've adjusted both of these to 5 to 6% in the 2016, rather the 2018 year. The subject property is not really a high-rise. It's more of a mid-rise building, so it's not specifically addressed in that. C.B. Richard Ellis on page 17 has a fairly tight range as well. They're indicating high rises from 5 to 5.75% in 2016 and 18, and low rises between a low of 5.5 and a high of 6% for low rise A and B, with low rise B being 5.75 and up. So, and then at the bottom of page 17, you can see the chart from C.B. Richard Ellis, essentially giving you a flat line with regard to capitalization rates from that kind of 2014 timeframe onwards. The market studies that these two organizations put out are specifically addressed at investment grade properties, so the upper end of the market is what they're examining essentially. And Manitoba housing properties as social housing properties in their condition where they're located they would fall outside of this range, or at a bare minimum be at the upper end of this range with regard to capitalization rates and the risks that obviously an investor would take on in buying these properties. So, looking at the subject property, as we've stated, it's located in a very challenged area in the city of Winnipeg, on Princess, in that Higgins kind of area. The cap rate range that we have in our market study ranges between roughly 5.5%, 5.25%, up to that 6.5% range. We're at the upper end of that range at 6.5% for the various reasons stated. This is summarized on page number 18 and gives you our final market value of $3,076,000. We have had quite a number of appeals of both Manitoba housing properties this cycle, as well as other social housing properties. We have had a great number of decisions in that 6.25%, 6.5% range based on the evidence that we've submitted in our hearings. And indeed, there's a property just on the other side of the CPR tracks that was decided at that 6.5% range. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. See, Mr. Wong, do you have questions?
No questions.
No questions? Mr. Whitbread, any questions of the applicant?
Just one, can you explain your number of suites at 56 and the assessors at 60? And maybe it's just a typo, because as I go into the third page of the assessors, he also has 56 suites, but on the front page he has 60.
That would be
That
a
may be-
mistake on our end.
So it's a typo, okay.
Yeah, the 60 on the first page is a typo.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Beretsky, questions?
Based on what you were saying, I conclude that your imaginary buyer of this property is someone who would be carrying on with it being affordable housing. Is that correct?
Well, not necessarily. It's a complicating factor, right? If you're acquiring this property and it has in-place programs, et cetera, and in-place tenants, you may be required to continue that, at least in the short term, certainly, before you may have the ability to alter the service provision there. But we're trying to look at it as what would the value be on the market based on what it is. So you're acquiring this property that is social housing. What you keep it as, I guess, depends on the purchaser.
And depending on whether it was a purchaser who was going to maintain it as affordable housing versus one who was not, I guess two questions come to my mind. Is it conceivable that the not part would occur in this location? Could it be used as normal, non-affordable rental property and have any substantial difference in its value, its rents and expenses, etc.? And if we have two different types of buyers in mind here, do they have different expectations about income and about expenses? And what reflection might that be on, say, cap rate?
Well, so our task, I guess, and I'm going to try and address your question as briefly as I can, but our task, of
I
course,
recognize
is
this is probably a 3-beer question.
yes. So I'll try and give you the Coles notes, I guess. So our task, of course, is to arrive at fair market value for the property. So it's we're not specifically looking at whether you have a buyer that would be buying it and continuing it as social housing or a market buyer. It's a purchase on the market. What would the value be based on what that property is and what it would operate for on the market, which is what we've based our income and vacancy and expenses, et cetera, on for the property. So we're looking at it as a market department in the operation of it, as far as the net income and the cap rate. With regard to purchases by, say, social nonprofits, et cetera, you sometimes get transfer from Manitoba Housing to an organization that is already involved in that building, in operating it. There's not a lot of those, but there are infrequent ones where that happens. Those are not market trades for various reasons. They're not exposed to the market. You're looking at a single buyer. It's not advertised. They're not seeking the maximum return for it, etc. So those are kind of set aside in terms of not being an indication of true market value. I go through the list that it has to meet with regard to being a fair market value, but that they wouldn't meet that. So we are treating it as though it were to trade on the market. Now, if you're an investor and you're buying it and the existing tenancies and programs there are set for a period of time, you may not be able to alter that. In fact, you probably can't for a period of time. Those tenants have legal rights to continue in place under the terms that they signed on with in the first place, essentially.
That makes me think of the Smith Street property that was affordable housing. Refresh my memory as to what has happened with that. I noticed the other day that it's being very substantially gutted. Is there something for us to learn from that property?
There is, absolutely. So that particular property, and it was our former office place for our company, was immediately adjacent to that. So, and we were involved with the both the assessment appeal for that property and some further work for them afterwards. So we know quite a bit of detail about it. That property had 2 floods where all of the heating systems and ventilation, etc., which were in the basement, were destroyed. So they had a first flood, they replaced the equipment, moved everybody out, replaced the equipment, moved people back in. Had a second flood that destroyed the new equipment, and they moved everybody out. And that particular property, it's about 375, 80 units, something of that nature. 300-ish of those units are bachelor units. It was in terrible condition, quite terrible condition. I've been through it at the time. Bachelor apartments are not particularly of use, they're not in high demand on the market by investors, so it was kind of an odd duck. Now, Manitoba Housing vacated the building, moved everybody out, so they didn't face any issues with regard to disposition, as there was nobody in place for that property. They just simply faced the backlash of public opinion from selling a property that would cost them more money to invest in and renovate and then provide their service again than it was worth. They were going to lose dramatic amounts of money if they attempted to rehab that property. So they sold it, and the purchaser, who is a local family, very long-term owners of apartment properties in Winnipeg, they are very well capitalized. They have the long game in mind. They were able to look at the property and determine that they were going to change it significantly. So they're now offering a mix of studio apartments that are over 2 floors. So they've adjusted it so that you'll have a main floor living room, kitchen, etc., and then a studio loft above in many cases, and some 1-bedroom. So it's a bit of a mix in there. They're also going to put in main floor retail and various things like that. So it's an entire revisioning of the property, and their units that are going to result from that are going to be quite nice and will produce good revenue for them, etc. But entirely different property than it was upon purchase, and they didn't face the issues with regard to the sale of it.
Do you know what the cap rate was in that sale?
There is no cap rate because there was no income or expense for the property.
Okay. The subject property has all 1-bedroom units.
Yes.
Is that, relatively speaking, more attractive in the market, less attractive than one that has a mix of sizes of units?
Typically, you'd be looking for a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units in the marketplace as being your optimum kind of build out. Sometimes there's bachelors, et cetera, but they produce less income, and if you have the option of getting a 1 bedroom versus a bachelor, most people that have the ability will take the 1 bedroom and pay a little bit more. So 1 and 2s as a mix is kind of the optimum. 1's on its own, you're getting one particular market segment, and you tend to be getting single occupants and in the location, and I'm just stating facts. I guess it's going to, for this particular property, it's going to tend to be single men. You tend to have more damage and wear and tear, particularly given the location of the property.
That's all my questions.
Thank you. I have a question. On your cap rates on page 15, was it not possible to find one that was more closely in the age group of the subject and the location of the subject?
Unfortunately, no, we did not have, there's not a lot of sales of more recently built properties. The 2006 Ford Avenue one is the one that we were able to research and have the data on. The vast majority of building in the city happened in those, there's a lot of apartments built in the 70s and then the 50s prior to that. So most of the trades are in that range.
Okay. Thank you. That's all my questions. That will conclude item number 1.
So I apologize for the time that took, but I will not cover a lot of that ground twice.
I think that, yeah, some of the arguments may be the same.
Me too.
Do you want to withdraw the cost and liability, or just leave it?
I'll withdraw the class and liability.
Item number 2 on the docket is 470 Pacific Avenue.
Transition.
Mr. Wong, whenever you're ready.
Okay, the subject property is 470 Pacific Avenue. The roll number is 130-715-49800. It's a residential apartment block that's 3 to 7 stories high. It's built in 1979 and has 97 suites with 22 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $714 to get a potential of $831,000. We use a 3% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $806,000. We use a 55% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $359,000. Capped at 5%, we have an estimated market value of $7,182,000, so $74,000 per unit. On page 4 are our rent comparables. And on the bottom page 4 are some expense comparables. Pretty much similar to the previous property. On page 5 is information on how we derive our cap rates. On page 7 is a picture of the subject property with its location and some information on the subject property. On page On page 10 are the CMHC rents. The average rent from CMHC is about $772, and the mall is utilized by $714, which is a little bit lower than what that CMHC is estimating. On page 11 and 12 are some permits for the subject property, indicating some major work to the property. On page 11 there, that particular permit has a declared construction value of $11 million. As with the previous property, we've looked at this as if it were a below average apartment building, and we've applied below average rents and higher than average expenses. And when you look at the permit value, it supports the model, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value of $7,182,000.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, questions of the assessor?
Trying to think about it.
You can
How best to
ask
frame this.
it.
So there's a standard process, I imagine, that the city would go through if there's a change in a property, say an adjustment to the number of units, you have to verify that before you make an adjustment to your role in the market value for it, correct?
Yeah, I mean, if there was a lot of work done, and whether they knocked down a building or added a building, we would inspect the property, verify the suite counts, and update it as required.
And that can take some time, I imagine, right? Sometimes.
Depends.
Yeah, not always, but,
Yeah.
and so for the subject property, that may be the case that there hasn't been a subsequent, hasn't been time to do the subsequent inspection of the property.
We've not inspected this property, unfortunately, as of to look at the work that's been done, and
Okay, thank you very much. Those are all of my questions.
Okay, Mr. Brinsky, questions?
That 2013 permit was for $11 million,
yes.
and was that spent?
I believe it was, considering that the project is complete now.
And what did it do for $11 million?
I believe they pretty much did everything. Like, the outside of the building did not look like that when prior to the work being done. I drive by it just, on my own time on a regular basis, and they pretty much redid the envelope as far as I can tell, and but I haven't seen the inside. But my assumption is that the interior has been fully renovated as well.
And it's not like a new building was added, say the three-story part was added, or
No.
it wasn't there before?
No.
That was how it was built in
I
1979?
I believe so.
And effective age is still 1979, that should actually be increased at some
Yes.
point?
Yes, like we're gonna go take a look at that. We're gonna go take a look at the work that's been done, and we'll probably put an effective age variant on the building.
And so they put 11 million in 2013, 90,000 in 2016, and for building that is currently assessed at $7.1 million.
They put a lot of money into it. regards to how we're looking at it, we're just trying to look at it as a below average apartment building, considering that it's Manitoba housing.
That's all my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, questions?
Well, I was going to go down that path as well. Do you not find it incredulous that an $11 million building would be categorized as below average? Because I'm having trouble with it.
I said, typically, it might be trying to compare it to regular standard apartment buildings. Affordable housing buildings do typically, experience more wear and tear, and that's why we look at it this way.
I've heard that presentation, and I
Yeah.
understand that,
Yeah.
Mr. Wong, but
Yeah.
$11 million is not a small amount of money on any building, and especially one with 97 apartments, suites. That equates to about $183,333 per unit, double your stated market value of $74,000.
Yeah, I guess we're trying to estimate these values as close to market as we can, but also as equitably as we can. And so so I think that's what we're trying to do. If you're trying to compare this to other sort of Manitoba housing type properties, it would be assessed in a similar manner. And I guess that's why we are at this particular assessment.
Okay, let me get on a different path
Sure.
then. A permit is taken out for $11 million in 2013. I assume the work is done somewhere in 2015 or 2016, quite a bit before the reference period.
Yeah.
Would someone inspect this building after the permit was done to make sure that what they said they were going to do was actually done?
Yes, typically when there are larger permits like this taken out, we would go out and verify the work that's been done, and also update the characteristics of the attributes in our system,
Right.
so that it could better reflect the value.
You said typically. Did I hear you tell Mr. Boretsky that that didn't happen in this case?
This particular case was I think they had some issues with the initial contractor that was doing the work, and so the work was, I think the permits were taken out in 2013, but I believe they had difficulty with the contractor, and so it took a while to maybe find new contractors or to get the work done, and so I think in previous years we've tried to inspect the property, but it wasn't completed, and then it kind of maybe fell off a little bit, but we do have it on the radar to go out and take a look at it to update our records.
So to reflect it in future information that comes from
Yeah, there likely will be an effective age variant and maybe a slight change in value.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So the property hasn't been inspected recently?
No, not since the renovation.
Thank you, that's all my questions.
I have one follow-up question, if I
Go ahead.
If the unit count, the number of units had changed, that would have an impact on the market value that would be produced by the city, correct?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if you'd like to.
Okay,
tell us about
absolutely.
the property.
So 470 Pacific, this particular property is Manitoba Housing owned. As Mr. Wong had stated, it did not look like the front picture on the front of my brief there, going back to the 2013-14 timeframe. It was a Manitoba Housing property operated for low-income residents, as all Manitoba Housing properties are. Manitoba has had a significant amount of immigration occurring to the province and to the city in particular, and this particular property was identified as a property that was going to be used for for incoming immigrants and refugees, and indeed it is, I guess, operated essentially by the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization of Manitoba, which is ERCOM, owned by Manitoba Housing, et cetera, but they are the ones that run the program out of there. I'm just going to get you to flip to the very back of my brief, because this is critical to our valuation here. We've had a significant change in the number of units to the property. There were 97 units, as Mr. Long stated previously in the breakout that it was previously, which was 60 bachelors, 12 one-bedrooms, and 25 two-bedrooms, for a total of 97, as it shows in the city's brief. For the purposes of accommodating this particular market segment through Manitoba Housing, it was identified that they needed they had different needs than the building could provide, and it has been entirely changed to suit those needs. So now we have 12 bachelor units, as there are a few bachelors on occasion that obviously need accommodating. 24 two-bedroom units and 24 three-bedroom units, for a total of 60 units. Or, and this is another aspect, is it's flexible. They can adjust the bachelors, pardon me, and I believe it's the bachelors that they combine with one of the other unit categories, some of them. So you end up with 12 two-bedrooms, 24 three-bedrooms, and 4 12-bedrooms if they have the need to accommodate families with greater numbers of residents. So,
Sorry, what did you just say?
if you look at, and I'm sorry, I should have pointed this out, if you look at my page number 3, and the suite counts at the bottom of the chart, it will give you a better visual of it. So the greatest number of units that they will have is 60 units, but there is some flexibility built into the bachelors and one of these other unit types where they can combine the bachelors through moving, I guess, a flexible wall and make some 4-bedroom units. So that would bring the total down to 48 units. We've valued it on the basis of 60 units, and that is the number of units that are there. The city will obviously get a chance to catch up with that when they get their inspection done and confirm the number of units. Now, to that end, just so I'm not just stating this figure, if you look at the very back of my brief, and the CDC News article states transitional housing complex has library, daycare, etc. for large families. The
What page are you?
very back of my brief, that's
Okay.
the last 2 pages. So
Yes.
if you go about just over halfway down that first page, it says the building has 60 units and is almost full after getting a recent facelift. Now that was produced on June 5th of 2017. So there are 60 units in the property. The city just has to have the opportunity to catch up to the renovations that have been done to the property. With regard to the permit value and what was spent on it, I think we probably need to address that, as that was an issue that popped up. When you're going to go through a renovation of a building like this and change the number of units, do an entire new envelope and new finishes, etc. for the units, it is going to be a significant amount of money. Now, do we simply add that to the market value? No, that's not appropriate, and it doesn't produce a fair market value. The way that these things are looked at is over a longer time horizon. So your costs of doing those renovations are amortized over, the lifespan of the length of time that you're amortizing, which can be 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, whatever the term of the time frame is. So the issue of what was spent on the building doesn't directly translate to a market value in the beginning. It does change the face of building and the attractiveness, et cetera, which will drive a different value, and we've reflected that in our value. But just so that we're not confusing the issue of the permit value with market value. So let's look at the building itself. Renovated in that 2014-15 onwards timeframe, as Mr. Long had stated there, they did have issues with their original contractor, and it took a longer period of time to get done than is typical. We had the property under appeal a couple of cycles ago on behalf of Manitoba Housing, and had a reduction as the property wasn't occupiable in any sense at that time frame. You can see the new finishes that have been put in place for the units as you go forward. So clearly the property has been renovated. Not the stairs, I don't know why we included that one, but it's there. It's still a Manitoba Housing property. It looks good in the photos. They don't necessarily remain in that condition as long as one would expect in a typical marketplace. But it is in that state now. Looking at location, page number 9, property is located on the corner of Isabel and Pacific, so it fronts right on Isabel, just in that north Centennial area again. Being located on Isabel, well, you've got good transit service, I guess, but it's not necessarily the most desirable location with regard to residences. Let's move on to market value. We've given, if we look at my page number 11, you have the CMHC stats for the city of Winnipeg. We have our rental rates that we have applied on page number 12. Obviously the property is in good condition. We've applied the market average for that area for bachelor units at $650. If you look at the 2 and 3 bedroom rents, well, there's no actual 3 bedroom being shown for Centennial. 2 bedrooms at $1,038 and 3 bedrooms above that. This is not a location or a property that would support those market averages. Yes, it's been renovated. No, you would not be drawing those particular rents. Now, would you get decent rents? Yes, you would. So we've attributed $900 for the 2 bedroom rents, which I think is probably fair if you look at the other indicators there, and $1,000 a month for the 3 bedroom rents. And this gives us $291,852 in revenue. On the expense side, we've attributed the 3% vacancy, and we've given you 3 years of operating history there, which produced a stabilized expense allowance of $464,352. If you look at our final chart on page 17, you can see that we did not use this amount. It would be significantly too high and would not produce a fair reflection of the market value. It's not that those expenses aren't there, they are, but in order to arrive at market value, we can't give you a ratio that would give you roughly 70-75% of expenses versus what the revenue that we would see for the property being. So we have, in this case, elected to use a lower expense amount, and that is shown in the chart.
Which chart, sorry?
Page number 17. Capitalization rate, we've heard all of my discussion with regard to that and the marketplace. The subject, it has a better mix of units, I suppose, at 12 bachelors, 24 two-bedrooms and 24 three-bedrooms, which again are non-standard, above the norm. But the property has been renovated. Balancing this, it's located on the corner of Isabel and Pacific in the North Centennial area there. It's not going to, and it's serving the cohort that it is. It's not going to draw a lot of strong interest on the investment market for an acquisition of a property such as this. To be fair, we've used a cap rate of 6% for the subject property. This is at the upper end of the range of the market participants, and kind of in the middle of our range with regard to the cap rates that we've shown in our brief. So using the resultant NOI, we get, and a cap rate of 6%, we get a market value of $4,506,000. So you look at this versus the city's $7,182,000, and you go, wow, that's a huge difference. Well, we're looking at 60 units versus 97 units, so it is going to be a huge difference. And when the city has the opportunity to do the inspection, there will be a change in I assume there will be a change in the market value, the assessment. So that gulf is not as big as one would initially think. That is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see if Mr. Wong has any questions.
Yeah, were you able to, I guess, get any sort of rent rolls to verify the change in suites?
We verified it with Manitoba Housing and the on-site manager with regard to the number of units that they have.
Okay, so the information that you presented on your page 3, you verified it with the Manitoba Housing and the manager?
We did, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So your highest number would be 60 units, and I think it's fair to value it on that basis versus the 48.
That would be all my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread, questions?
Just a little bit of clarification then on your page 17 with the expense rate. So you're suggesting that, and I must have missed this, because you're suggesting that 57.85 would be a proper rate, 57.85 for a building that's had $11 million spent on it, and you have characterized as good condition?
I've characterized it as being in good condition at the moment, yes,
Yeah.
it is, yeah. So currently it is in good condition, as we've talked about here today. You know, it won't necessarily remain in that condition. It is there now.
We have to deal with current events,
We
not
do,
future
yes.
events.
We do,
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
absolutely right. So could it be marginally lower than where we were at, perhaps at the city's expense level? Yes, it could.
Could it be substantially lower than what it's at?
Not typically, no. I do know what you're saying with regard to the renovation. And so let's, and it's a delicate issue, right, with regard to housing and condition, et cetera. But so we have a brand new building here, and we look at page number 7. We can see there's already damage occurring to drywall, et cetera. I know that's one photo that we're looking at, and I don't want to exaggerate, but they do not tend to remain in pristine condition for a long time. It could be lower than the city's, potentially. It's a difficult thing to arrive at a number. We, in coming up with our value, I've tried to be very fair with regard to the rent side of our equation and not underestimating it, because it's not in below average condition, it's in good condition. So we're at a level that I think is appropriate. You could certainly make a slight deduction perhaps from the expense allowance.
Okay, something to think about. Thank you.
Mr. Bretsky?
A couple of questions. And actually, first one I'll direct back to the assessor. I'm not understanding why, given what we've now learned from the agent about the history of the last few years and the change in the building, why is it that upon appeal, we went back to the assumption that there was 97 units as opposed to presenting us a value that is reflective of the 60 units, the changes that have gone on in the building?
Like having seen this information, I guess I actually didn't even notice the change in the difference in units until Mr. Smith pointed it out to me prior to our hearing. So we weren't aware that I guess as part of the renovation they changed the suite mix.
Okay. Question for you would be, given that while the $11 million was being spent, R&M in 2016 was $211,000, then $197,000, then $214,000, substantial amounts still being spent on R&M. So none of the 11, what was the 11 spent on versus anything that would help with R&M?
Right. I don't have a specific answer for you. So the renovation was largely done in 2014-15. Was that time frame, and their year end is March 31. So that to my knowledge, the March 31, 2016 column there might be a period of time where it wasn't fully occupied, but carrying forward from there.
So it's all post-renovation then?
To my knowledge, I would expect that most of that would be post-renovation, yeah.
And am I correct in understanding that although you stabilized it at $464,000, you're actually using 370?
That's right. So if we take the 464,000 versus my rental income of 640,000, your resultant NOI would be not reflective of an appropriate level of NOI for the building. So your expense ratio there would be way too high, not appropriate. So in order to arrive at a fair market value, we have to adjust that figure downwards.
And so we're looking at an expense allowance percentage of almost 58%, but that is several years after the renovation. It's representative of.
It is
a fair
after.
bit after.
It is after the renovation, yeah. I would still say that it is in decent condition.
Okay. All right, those are my questions.
So the article that you've put in the back here, I see now that was posted June the 5th, 2017.
That's right.
When were your pictures in the front here of your brief? When were they taken?
July of this summer.
Okay. I have a question of the assessor. Because there's been physical change to this property, am I right in saying that your department can go out and set whatever value they deem to be fair, regardless of our decision here?
Yes, I mean, after we inspect the property, we'll determine, I guess, when the changes occurred, and we could retroactively issue a supplementary notice for an adjusted value.
That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perhaps we'll recess.
Can I just say, I guess, a couple words for summation before we?
Yes, go right ahead.
Sure.
Sorry.
I guess with regards to the income for affordable housing, it's probably not representative. It's not representative of market, but in this case, like, you know, their expenses are not representative of market either, because typically with housing type properties, whereas like market apartment buildings, some include all utilities, some include no utilities, some include some utilities, and with the particular with affordable housing, they typically include all the utilities, and so they're using their actual expenses would be sort of skewing those expenses fairly high relative to the market, and so and on top of that, it's a possibility that when all utilities and stuff are included, there might be some excessive use of utilities, which might kind of snowball things a tiny bit more even. And so, using affordable housing expenses, not likely representative of market level expenses, and also, I guess, I just wanted to say, with regards to, you were talking about the sale of Smith, like 185 Smith, it's sold in a gutted state for approximately $70 a square foot, and applying something like that to a property such as this works out to about $5.6 million, and so I feel that supports the 7.1 that we currently have it at. And I guess I would ask that you maintain it.
Thank you. Is there any summation?
Well, I didn't, but I do now. With regard to the valuation that we've presented for the subject property, I've gone through it in detail. I think that the figures that we've provided you with here are very fair. If you wanted to make a slight adjustment to perhaps the expense allowance, I would understand that. I don't think we're out of line in how we have treated it. If you look at the actual expenses, not the expense allowance, but the expenses, the number that is attributed to the property, the resultant NOI, and the final market value based on the other factors, obviously, is a very fair amount. With regard to 185 Smith, I can talk about that for the remainder of the day if you wish, as I know it inside and out largely. We've had discussions with the new owner and some properties with regard to it. We've seen the projections of what it's going to look like.
And explain that Smith property
I have
very well.
my point, and I just want to make a correction to what has been stated. The property had been gutted in that the systems had been brought back in, so it wasn't that the systems were not present. Asbestos had been stripped out, etc. So it was essentially in a state where it was acceptable to a developer to purchase as a rehab project and conversion to another state. So the resultant sale price, etc., and the fact that they're converting it to a dramatically different use with an entirely different return, you cannot treat the price per square foot of that and say, well, that supports our assessed value here, either for ourselves or for the city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will take a short recess. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order, and we will deal with 195 Yonge Street. Item number 3.
The subject property is 195 Yonge. The roll number is 120-910-74000. It's a residential apartment block that's 12 stories high. It was built in 1977 and it has 70 suites with 36 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our valuation summary. We use average rents of $657. We get a potential income of $552,000. We use a 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $537,000. We use a 58% expense ratio. We get a net operating income of $222,000. With the 5%, we have an estimated market value of $4,445,000, which was $63,000 per unit. On page 4 are rent comparables and some expense comparables. Page 5 is information on how we derive our cap rates. Various to the previous property. On page 7 is a picture of the subject property with its location. Page 8 and 9 is the income statement provided by the owner. And on page 10 are CMHC rents. For the subject property, the average is about $766, and the model is applied a rate of $657. So once again, the model is applied a rent that is on the lower end of the range for market, and applied a expense rate that is on the higher end of the range for market. So the market supports the model, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $4,446,000.
Thank you. Questions of Mr. Wall?
I don't have any questions, no.
Questions? Mr. Whitbread, questions?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Bransky?
You know, just noticing the communication equipment up on the roof.
Yes.
So there is additional revenue. Is that what I'm seeing as roof lease revenue? Is that of any significance?
I think if it was a market level apartment, it would be significant in the sense that it would be additional income. But for this one, because there's so many, the numbers are so different from market that it doesn't make much of a difference.
Okay. That's all my questions.
So, it's your position then that you haven't made any adjustment to the cap rate for the fact that this is kind of public housing? You've adjusted the rents are lower and the expenses given are higher.
Yeah.
Therefore, there's no adjustment to the cap rate?
Correct. Typically, I find typically a lot of it is borne out in the rent, and so if you can reflect it in the rent, then using a market level cap rate is a good estimate of value.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. Mr. Smith, would you like to take us through your information?
Yes, absolutely. So 195 Yonge Street actually fronts right on Broadway, on West Broadway. If you flip to either my page number 9 and 10, I guess. 9 gives you the site description, so you can see that it fronts right on Broadway. And 10 will give you the location on West Broadway there in regard to the subject property. So looking at valuation for the subject, built in 1977, largely original to that time frame. If you flip through the photographs, there's been no rehab or refresh of this building. They have repaired things where required, so you'll see that there's a new countertop in the one kitchen photograph that we have, but not in the other one. The one was damaged to the extent that it had to be replaced. That's why you see that there. The finishes are the original flooring, the original cabinetry, the original bathrooms, et cetera, so it's in that original state. Being Manitoba housing, it is in below average condition. Having done the inspection there, it is borne out. The total number of suites here is 70 suites. Now our mix here is 30 bachelor units and 42 bedroom units. So 2 bedrooms, certainly greater demand for 2 bedrooms than there is for bachelors, greater demand for 1 bedrooms than there is for bachelors. So we're looking at 30 out of 70 units, so a little under 50% of the units being bachelor apartments. That being an important part of the market that Manitoba Housing has the mandate to provide housing for in their social housing model. The location, obviously, we're located in that West Broadway area, and that would obviously have an impact with regard to rent and desirability, et cetera, as well. Looking at the actual valuation of the property, we felt that the city's estimate of revenue for the property in this instance was a fair reflection of value, looking at the suite mix and the location, et cetera. We have also obviously gone through the expenses. We have assigned the same vacancy rate as the city has at 2.6%. If you look at the stats in the area support a higher vacancy rate. We're not asking for a higher vacancy rate, we're simply applying a 2.6%. The expense allowance for the subject property, we've gone through the stabilization of the expenses. On the bottom of page number 14, you can see that, as is often the case, the repair and maintenance budget, or expenses rather, are higher than what one might typically see in the marketplace. That is reflective of the property and the cohort that the market segment that is served. However, in the interests of our valuation, we have adjusted the repair and maintenance budget down to $1,500 per unit and applied a 5% property management fee to effective gross income to stabilize the expenses. It gives us $349,859 for the subject property. Moving on to capitalization rate, we're looking at property that has just under 50% bachelor units located in the West Broadway area. And all the other issues with regard to cap rate that we've already discussed. This is going to have an impact on the cap rate that would be applied in the marketplace. We have reflected this with a cap rate of 6.25% in our analysis. Now, looking at our page number 19, I'll make a couple of comments here, I guess. We attributed some parking and laundry revenue that was included in the income and expense for the property, in addition to the rental income level that the city has, giving us a higher gross potential income, deducted vacancy, and then we added the roof lease income on beyond that. There's not going to be a vacancy for the roof lease, so we applied the whole revenue for the roof lease in our analysis at just under $12,000. Do roof leases always remain in place? Not necessarily. They could move to another tower in the area and serve the same area, so it is there. We have recognized it. It doesn't mean that it will always be there, but we've recognized it in our analysis. On the expense side, you saw our stabilized expenses came to $349,859 based on the adjusted R&M and property management. Certainly fair for the property. And this gives us our net operating income of $206,406. Now, I'm looking at this, and I certainly believe that what we projected here is fair. You could also look at it in the manner that the city has for this property, and I wouldn't necessarily be opposed in that you disregard the laundry and parking revenue and the roof lease, etc., and arrive at their net operating income. In this case, for this property, given the complications of it, I don't have a particular issue with that. I believe that our value is fair, and it's based on the information that I'm presenting to you here. But I just wanted to put that forward, that if you were to use that NOI, I could understand that, or our NOI, which is more than well supported, is certainly fair as well. It takes into account the roof lease income and the actuals with the deduction to bring it down to market levels. So the 6.25% capitalization rate, again, location is a key factor, as is the suite mix, lots of bachelors, and you're looking at condition as well as disposition issues as well with these properties. So 6.25% is certainly fair, which gives us our market value of $3,302,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Questions? Mr. Beretsky, questions?
No question.
Mr. Whitbread, questions?
No questions.
I have a couple of small questions about you said you inspected the property?
We did, yes.
When did you inspect it?
It was inspected in July of this year.
Okay, and I think you mentioned something about location. Would you consider this to be a good location for rental income on Broadway, rental property?
Yes and no. You're looking at West Broadway here, and while there have been improvements to the area, there is still a lot of socioeconomic issues that occur there. You have greater levels of crime and drug issues and break-ins and graffiti and damage, etc. in that area, as well as other crimes than you would perhaps in other areas. It's reflected in the cap rate that we've used at 6.25%.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
That will conclude 250 Furby, or 195 Young, I should say, and we will move on to 250 Furby.
The subject property is 250 Furby. The roll number is 120-906-15000. It's a residential apartment block that's 2 stories high. It's built in 1959, but we have an effective year built between 1959 to 1979. There are 24 suites with 8 outdoor apartment stalls. On page 2 is the sales history for the subject property. Most recent sale was in 2012 for $920,000. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $654 to get a potential income of $188,000. We use the 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $183,000. And we use the 46% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $97,000. Kept at 4.7%, we have an estimated market value of $2,079,000, $86,000 per unit. On page 4 are rent comparables, and that rents we've used are in line with what's on the market, maybe a little bit lower. On page 5 is a summary of the income and expenses submitted by the owner. Their estimated NOI is about $130,000, which is noticeably higher than what the model is estimated at $97,000 in terms of NOI. Page 6 is information on how we derived our cap rates. Page 8 and 9 are some pictures of the subject property. property was inspected in 2014, so that we could update the property record to reflect the renovation work that was done. On page 10, 11, 12, or to 10 to 15 are the income statements provided by the owner. And on the last page, on page 16, is the permit that was taken out for the renovations. The declared construction value was $650,000. When you look at the actual performance of the property, your stabilized NOI is about $230,000, which is much higher than what the model was estimated at $97,000. So the actual performance supports the model, and I actually maintain the assessed value of $2,079,000.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Smith, do you have questions of?
I have no
Mr.
questions.
Wall, no questions? Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
Just one, did you say it was inspected after the permit was complete?
Yeah.
And can you comment, good, excellent, what kind of condition?
I would say that the pictures, a colleague of mine inspected the property. I would say that the pictures that he took are reflective of the condition of the property, and so it appears to be in good condition.
Good condition, thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Gretzky?
Well, the permit was issued August 2013. Photos are dated June
August 2014.
2014. So these photos are post-renovation work or
Yes.
not?
Yes.
They are. So, and what was the $650,000 spent on? Things that we would see in the photos or other things?
Other things in the sense that apparently they added 3 new suites in the basement.
Oh. Did you inspect this property?
No, I did not. My colleague did.
Somebody did. Did anybody wonder where the kitchen sink is?
Actually, it might be, that you see that counter, the island counter?
Mhm.
I think it might be just behind that. You see
Oh, I see,
there's two levels.
There's
There's
two
two
levels.
levels, yeah. But I,
Okay.
oh,
Sorry,
there
that was-
was another.
A lot of tea there, that's
Actually,
all.
I don't know.
Okay, and do you know what has been spent on repair and maintenance post-renovation?
The last couple of years of income statements are in my brief. For
I think on page 13,
Yeah.
maintenance repair, $12,000.
Yeah, that seems to be
That is-
in line with 2017, which is about 10,000, I think. Yeah, around 10,000.
That's all my questions.
Thank you. The suite breakdown, 18 bachelors, is that a detriment to the property?
I think it can be a detriment, but I guess I don't really look at the optimal suite counts. It's like, well, what do buildings sell for, and they, as far as I can tell, all apartment buildings seem to be fairly desirable, and so even if it might not have, say, the optimal suite count, it still has a good value to it. I've seen a building all bachelors that actually sold for a high value, and there was renovation work done to it, but it had no problem selling for a high value. So that's why sometimes when people talk about the optimal suite mix, I'm not sure how much that affects the value.
Okay. So this isn't a CMHC property or anything?
No,
It's private
this is
ownership?
private.
That's all my questions, thank you. Mr. Smith, would you like to tell us about what you know about the property?
Absolutely. So 250 Furby, this is a private market apartment, not down to the housing today.
Okay.
Originally built in 1959 with the renovation work occurring in that 2014, 2015 timeframe, where they added 3 units to the property in the basement and renovated the interior of the units as well. So we can have a look at that. Our suite count is 18 bachelor units and 6 one-bedroom units, so 18 out of 24. Just to speak to that point that had just been discussed previously with regard to suite mix, etc. There's a range, obviously, in the marketplace of what things trade for, and there's a lot that goes into that: location, condition, suite mix, desirability, any outside influences, etc. that comes into play. So one of those things is obviously the suite mix, and it's not really a debated point. Bachelors are in lesser demand now. If you take that building, if it's well located, perhaps where it was stated one property was all bachelors and was renovated, well, maybe the other influence is in that particular case has had a greater effect perhaps on a developer's point of view with regard to what their return could be on that post-renovation. Now, we're not talking about any potential future value of properties today. We're looking at the property as it sits in its physical state as of the valuation date, not what its potential future can be. So the subject was renovated. It is in above average condition. I would state this particular owner and property manager has done quite a number of renovations in not typically in West Broadway. They have a few there. Most of them are in the West End, where they have taken some properties and done renovations. They tend to have a greater degree of challenges with regard to vacancy in their properties for the reasons that they've increased the rents beyond market guidelines, and they don't necessarily stay as occupied as you would in those same areas because people can't necessarily afford the rent levels that they have applied to their properties by taking them out of rent guidelines. Now, property is located in West Broadway. I think you can see it on my page number 12, north of Broadway, between Portage and Broadway there. It has been renovated in that 2015 timeframe. As with some of the housing properties, we did inspect the property. They have had vandalism and damage subsequent to that renovation date. Now, That being said, the units themselves overall would be in above average condition. And the photos there are post renovation. I'm afraid I can't tell you where the sink is, as I can't see it in my photo either. Oh, yes, I can actually, in that particular one at the bottom of page 5, there's a sink, so they have water. The common areas were not renovated when it was inspected at that time. They had original carpeting, etc., so small feature, but it is there. The location we've discussed. Let's move on to the value. The rents for the subject property, again, we have 18 bachelors, 6 one-bedroom. Their scheduled revenue at 100% occupancy for 2017 was $196,270. This is on my page number 14. The less discounted rent of $9,000+ would bring you down to that below $190,000. I think that's in the $187,000 range roughly. However, they also had water and hydro chargebacks of $8,600 roughly, so that brings our revenue to $195,739, which is what we've used for the property. That comes to $680 per month. We felt that that was certainly in line with the market and somewhat in tune with what the city had applied to it, so we feel that is reflective. We've included the parking revenue. And on the expense side, we've applied the market vacancy rate of 2.6%. We've given you the market stats there for vacancy. This gives us $5,164 in vacancy. Their actual vacancy in 2017 was just under $8,000. So as I said, their vacancy tends to be higher than what the market is for many of these properties. On the expense allowance side, their actual expenses for 2017 were $84,079, as shown on the income statement, so that is the actual. If you break this down and look at what was spent, so 2 issues here. We have an owner and a property manager that run their properties, I'll say delicately, particularly leanly. So their repair and maintenance costs tend to be lower. Second issue is we have a property that's just been renovated. So you have a bit of a grace period where your repair and maintenance is going to be somewhat lower than what it normally would be. Our task is to look at what this property would be on a normalized basis. So their expenses for R&M for 2017 came to $397 per unit. You can spend that extremely easily on a unit. That's virtually nothing. Again, we have that issue where the property has been renovated, but you do have kind of a normalized amount of expense that one would expect in the marketplace. As I stated, they do have damage and vandalism, etc., that has occurred here. So I've made an adjustment to $800 per suite for R&M, which gives us our expense allowance of $93,757. This would be on the low end of the market at $800 for R&M, and is certainly indicative. Looking at capitalization rate, this is a standard market apartment. It has been renovated. There's no upside to this property in purchasing it. It is in a somewhat less advantaged area in West Broadway. It has a lot of bachelor units. It has, as I stated, it's in that West Broadway area with the issues that are present there. One takes these into account in making their purchases. The ranges of cap rate ranges, we've already stated our own study. We've also looked at the C. Richard Ellison Collier stats, and they're tending to give us that 5 to 6% overall range, 5.25, 5.25 plus, et cetera, on low rises. Looking at the subject, it's been renovated, so we're not going to apply the high end of the range, but we have more bachelor units than normal. It's in West Broadway, we're at 5.75%. Cap rates of 4.7%. I'm not going to get into detail with regard to this, but they are reflective of properties that were not purchased for in-place income and expense and are not true representations of capitalization rates on marketplace. I can talk about that in much greater detail if the panel wishes, but I'll leave it at that for now. That gives us our final market value of $1,734,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, any questions of the appellant?
No questions.
No questions, Mr. Whitbread?
No questions.
Mr. Bransky?
No questions?
There was $130,000 NOI mentioned someplace. Was that in your brief?
That was me.
Oh, that was in the assessor's brief. Okay, well, I won't ask you questions about that. Okay, I have no other questions. Thank you.
I think the income and expense data and the rent roll is actually included, so if you do the
In
math
your
and go
brief,
through
so
theirs,
that
it
would
would be roughly what well, it would be a little higher than what we'd stated because of the exceptionally low R&M.
That's fine, thank you. That will bring us to item number 5, 356 Young Street.
The subject property is 356 Young Street. The loan number is 130-511-41500. This is a Manitoba housing property. It's a residential apartment building that's 6 stories high. It was built in 1985, and it has 30 units with 24 outdoor parking stalls. Page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $846 to get potential income of $304,000. Use a 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $296,000. We use a 58% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $122,000. Capped at 5%, we have an estimated market value of $2,452,000, which is about $81,000 per unit. Page 4 are our rent comparables and expense comparables. Page 5 is information on how we direct our cap rates. Page 7 is a picture of the subject property with its location. And page 8 is the income statement provided by the owner. On my last page 10 is the CMHC rents. The average CMHC rent for comparable units for the subject property is about $1,155, and the model has applied a rate of $846, so it's on the low end of the range for market. So as with the other Manitoba housing properties, the rents that we've applied are on the lower end of the range for market, and the expenses that we've applied are on the higher end of the range. So with the model supported by the market, and I asked you maintain the assessed value at $2,453,000.
Thank you.
Excuse me, so I think we'll just grab some water.
Yes, go right ahead. questions of the assessor? You have no questions?
I have no questions.
Brisky, any questions?
So the repair and maintenance is hovering around 70,000 per year, correct?
Yes.
You're using, well, based on what we've seen so far today, relatively high rent, 846. Now, this property has a high expense ratio, 58.66, and a low cap rate of 5%. Somehow, I just would have thought that if the expense ratio is getting high relative to some of the others that we've seen,
Yeah.
that the cap rate would be higher. Why is it not?
It's mostly because it's a 1985 building, so, you know, it is a Manitoba housing property, but in the grand scheme of things, in terms of the vintage or age of this particular building, is definitely on the newer end of the range. A lot of the they can start at 1900s or, you know, early or very late 1800s even. So that's kind of the beginning of some of the stock that we have, and so the 1985 is on the newer end of the range, and that's why it has a 5% cap rate. And once again, the value bears out in the rent and the operating income. And usually, like if it's a less desirable area, it's probably not gonna get the rent. And if it's not a great condition building, then it's not going to get the rent. So it's usually bears out in the income.
Okay, that's all my question.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread? Can I ask you a
No.
question? Does the location play a part in the cap rate?
Yes.
Yes.
I guess in our less desirable area, there's, I think it's market region 4, the cap rate that is higher than say the rest of the city.
That's the only place that it makes a
Yeah.
difference,
Yeah.
just there. And that's where we were looking at earlier this morning, Centennial is still on this side of the
Yes.
rail lines, so that wasn't getting any.
No,
it's
it would
the
be on
other-
the north side of
North side.
the rail.
That's all my questions, thank you. Mr. Smith, if you'd like to take us through your information.
Absolutely. So just with regard to cap rate and the divisions there, obviously the city has their model, and they have a difficult job to do, and they have to make you know, lines in the sand and divisions, et cetera. So you get one area that is given one or two areas that are given a higher capitalization rate. Now, looking at reality and location of properties, whether they're on one side of the street or the other, is this area, you know, are sections of Centennial comparable to other areas that get a higher cap rate? Yeah, yes, there are those distinctions in the real marketplace. So I just want to point that out. The other issue with regard to, and this is regarding my information here as well, with regard to income and expense, the properties are valued on the basis of what condition are they in, what is the suite mix, what deferred maintenance is there, what other issues are there, what are the expenses, et cetera, what are appropriate expenses. That all comes into play. That doesn't impact, that doesn't change the fact that that doesn't entirely address the issues and take them out of consideration for cap rate. They're considered in the cap rate as well as far as what is applied. So applying a cap rate of 5% is not appropriate to properties such as this in these locations. So let's look at the subject property, 356 Yonge Street. Built in 1985, again, we're back into Manitoba Housing here. Manitoba Housing's mandate is to build and provide housing to those in need of low-income housing in the city. So they do tend to build their properties in these locations where you're not going to find typical market investors building new developments in 1985. So we have a property located at 356 Yonge Street, in the west end of downtown in that Spence neighborhood. It fronts on Young, as you can see on my page number 8. And the exact location is shown on page number 9 with the arrow giving you an indication of where it is. Property was built in '85, has 20 two-bedroom units, 10 three-bedroom units for a total of 30 units. You can see the photographs of the property inside. There has been some change in flooring to a few units that required it. For the most part, the building is original to that date of 1985. And we can move on to the valuation. Looking at valuation for the subject property, on the income side, we looked at the rent level applied by the city, the condition and location of the property, and we felt that it was appropriate for the subject. So this gives us, we're in agreement with the rental income of $304,574. Actual revenue brought in was roughly half that at $146,000. Now that's rent geared to income. We don't rely on that, obviously. The expense side, we've applied 2.6% vacancy, and we've done our stabilization of the expenses as shown at the bottom of page 13. We come to $174,978 in expenses. This is with an adjustment to the repair and maintenance down to $1,500 per unit. As you can see, the expenses were higher than that. This is within the normalized range of market apartments at the upper end. Certainly, they're going to have greater R&M for property such as this. We've also applied the 5% property management allowance. Capitalization rate, you have heard our discussion with regard to this, so let's look at subject property. It would be in below average condition in general. It's located in that Spence neighborhood. It has a mix including 3-bedroom units. Is it going to be below the upper end of the investment range that the main market participants are seeing of that roughly 5.5% to 6% or 5.25% to 6% for low-rise apartments as of the valuation date? No, it's not. And we've spoken about all the other issues. This does not have, a great degree of bachelors. It was built in '85. However, it's located where it's located and is in the condition it's in. So we've applied a cap rate of 6% for the subject property. That's kind of in the middle of our range and at the upper end of the investment grade range as stated by the main market commercial brokerages. So using a 6% cap rate gives us our market value of $2,093,000. And again, this property was built in 1985. That is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, any questions?
No questions.
No members, Mr. Britsky, no questions? Mr. Whitbread?
No question. Thank you.
Suite mix.
Yes.
There's no bachelors in this, 22 bedrooms and 10 3-bedrooms. Is that a good thing? Is that positive?
The greater number of 2 bedrooms is a positive thing, certainly. 3 bedrooms on the marketplace are more challenging to lease up as well. So your typical mix that you look for is that 1 and 2 bedrooms with a variability between 1 and 2s, but having 3 bedrooms is more challenging, so that is another factor.
That's all.
But it's not, 87% bachelors or anything of that nature.
Thank you. That's all my questions. So that will take us to item number 6, 400 Langside Street.
The subject property is 400 Langside. The roll number is 130-507-39200. It's a residential apartment building that's 6 stories high. It was built in 1979 and it has 53 suites with 32 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We used average rents of $958 to get a potential income of $609,000. We used a 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $593,000. We used a 55% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $265,000. Capped at 5%, we have an estimated market value of $5,308,000, or $309,000, which is $1100,000 per unit. On page 4 are our rent and expense comparables. And the rents and expenses are supported by the market. Page 5 is information on how we derive our cap rates. Page 7 is a picture of the subject property with its location. Page 8 and 9 is the income expenses supplied by the owner. Page 10 are CMHC market rent. For the subject property is averaging about $1,111, and the model rent applied to the subject property is $958. As with the previous properties, the rents we've used are a little bit below market, so on the lower end of the range for market, and the expenses are on the higher end of the range. And the cap rate is in line with the market, so I have to maintain the assessed value at $5,309,000.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, any questions?
Yes, just just a couple. So this property, 400 Langside, it's located in very close proximity to the one that we just dealt with at 356 Yonge Street. Is that correct? If they're
I'm not sure.
on the same block, just one street over from each other.
If you know that they're close, then yeah.
Okay, thank you. And this property was built in 1979, that one was built in 1985. This one has a greater number of 2 bedrooms, higher percentage of 2 bedrooms than the other one, and yet this property has an average rent applied by the city that's significantly greater than the other one. Do you know what went into that?
I'm not sure. Both the properties have probably rents that are a little bit below what has been estimated by CMHC.
They do indeed. What I was looking at was the average monthly rent assigned to the Yonge Street property, which is newer and has a better suite mix, was $846, and this is $958. Just wondering what the gulf is there.
I'm not sure why.
That's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bretsky, questions?
Maybe if we could start at that end, I want to do a
Okay,
calculation
Mr.
here
Whitbread,
first.
do you have any
No,
questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
Does the fact that this building seems to have balconies for every suite, would that change the rental rates? I don't know if the other building has,
I think the other one had it as well, so
okay, we'll wait a minute.
I mean-
You good?
Is the repair and maintenance a bit on the low side for this building?
the repair and maintenance, it ranges from about $86,000 a year to about $127,000 a year. typically the repair and maintenance for Manitoba housing properties are either a little on the high side or a lot on the high side. I'd actually, like, they actually have detailed categories for all their repair and maintenance, but for some reason they're all zeroed out, and it'd be interesting to see, but I still, even if we saw it, it probably wouldn't be very representative of a market repair and maintenance.
Okay. This is a relatively common design for MHRC properties?
I think the last one was similar, so this one might be similar.
Any particular issues with the exterior maintenance, exterior condition on these?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the condition.
That's all.
Thank you. And I've asked my questions, so Mr. Smith, take us through your
Certainly.
information.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're looking at 400 Langside here, built in 1979, and we're looking at a total of 53 units, 42 of those being 2 beds and 11 3-bedroom units. So Manitoba Housing, they have 2 large market segments that they need to serve given their mandate, that being single people and then families. So they tend to have either a lot of bachelors in that 70, 75, 80% plus range of their suite mix, or they tend to skew and have 3 and 4 and 5 bedrooms in some cases. So in this case, we have a mix with 42 2 bedrooms and then 11 3 bedrooms. So certainly 42 2 beds is a plus. 3 bedrooms are more challenging to lease on the market. This property has not gone through a refresh. You can see the interior. It's actually, I would state that it's in a lesser condition than the property that we just dealt with at 356 Yonge Street. Both of them have balconies. You can see the photos of the property inside. We have this down following inspection as being inferior to the Yonge Street property. They are located virtually back to back on opposite streets on the same block in that Spence West End area, and that is an issue that we'll deal with here. So looking at market rent, we've given you the market stats for CMHC on page number 11. Looking at a fair level of rent for the subject property. We look at 356 Yonge, as stated, built in 85. Lesser percentage of the bedroom or units being 2 bedrooms. That property being in somewhat superior condition to the subject property, identical location, et cetera. Rental rate there appeared to be appropriate for the marketplace as set by the city. For the subject property, we're looking at over $100 more per month, with a greater number of the units being a lower unit count, so 2 bedrooms versus 3. We've got 42 out of 53 units being 2 beds here versus 20 out of 30 on the prior one. All things point towards the rent assigned to this property being on the high side. We feel that it would be appropriate for market value to apply at a minimum the same rental rate as assigned to the Yonge Street property to the subject, which is what we have done, which gives us $538,056 in revenue. Again, rent geared to income for the property, they actually generated $241,000, so under half of what is being projected for it. We can't base the value on that. We've applied 2.6% vacancy, and our expense stabilization is at the bottom of page number 13. So, again, adjustments have been made. We've included 5% of effective gross income for property management, market norms. It's not accounted for by Manitoba Housing in their income and expense statements. And their repair and maintenance ranged between $117,000 and $160,000 in the three prior years for this property. That is quite high. It is reflective of what the repairs are that they have to do for it, but we can't include that as a regular market norm. So we have changed the R&M downwards to $1,500 a unit, so we have $79,500 in R&M expense instead of, say, $160,000 in the March 31, 2018 income and expense. So significant reduction in expenses in what we've applied to the property. Capitalization rate, we have just discussed with the prior property. We are using the same 6% capitalization rate for the subject. Our valuation is shown on page number 18 in its entirety in comparison to the cities. You can see that our NOIs come out very similar based on the valuation that we have done here using the actual expenses with the adjusted R&M. We come to virtually the same NOI, and we've applied the 6% cap, which gives us $4,434,000. And I'm open for questions.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Brett, any questions? I have a question or even a comment, but you've been, you inspected this building, took these pictures?
We have, yes.
When was this, reasonably recently?
It was done this summer, yes.
Because of all the pictures we looked at today, these are probably the better of this building looks better than most.
So,
But if you've been in it, I think you.
yeah, we have. It hasn't had a refresh. If you look at bottom of page 6, well, page 6 overall. So if you look at the top, you can see the original flooring. They haven't. Manitoba Housing's new flooring is this faux wood laminate that they put in. It's the original tile flooring there. The cabinetry is the original on page 6. You may have a different countertop there because the original would have had to be replaced in that instance. But overall, this would be in slightly below the condition of the prior property.
That's all my questions, so that will conclude 400 Langside. And move us along to item number 7, 5.
Sorry, that one's been withdrawn.
Item number 7 has been withdrawn, very good. That will move us along to item number 8, 475 Sargent Avenue.
The subject property is 475 Sargent Avenue. The roll number is 130-519-13500. It's a residential multi-use property that's 7 stories high. It was built in 1987 and it has 50 suites with 39 outdoor parking stalls. At the bottom of page 1, recommending that the value be revised to this $4,539,000, which is the same as the original assessment, but there's going to be a different split. Originally, the entire property was 20G, 20 grantable, residential grantable, and there is a daycare in there which is exempt, and so splitting that part of it out the total value is the same, but the classification split is on the bottom of page 1.
I see that, yes. Very good.
And that is, can be seen on page 3. For the apartment, we use average rents of $879 to get a potential income of $527,000. Use a 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $514,000. And use a 58% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $212,000. Capped at 5%, we have an estimated market value of $4,251,000, which is about $85,000 per unit. The estimated operating income for the daycare is about $18,000. On page 4 is information on the premise, the leasable area. It's about 2,982 square feet with a net rate of $6.96. On page 5 are rent comparables and expense comparables, showing that the rents and expenses are in line with what's on the market, supported by the market. On page 6 are some commercial rent comparables. Supports the rate that we've applied. Page 7 is information on how we derive our cap rates. Page 9 is a picture of the subject property with its location. On page 10 and 11 is the income statements provided by the owner for 3 years. On the last page is the CMHC rents. The average rent is based off of CMHC market rents is about $1,136, and the model is applied $879. As with the previous properties, the rents that have been applied are on the low end of the range for market, and the expenses are on the higher end of the range. So as they maintain the assessed value at $4,539,000 with the different classification.
Very good, thank you. Any questions?
Just one, the daycare is fully exempt, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, that's my only question, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Whitbread?
No questions.
Mr. Redsky?
Your comparable leases for substantiating the 696 used in the daycare,
Yeah.
what are these uses at these 5 locations?
They're typical.
Netted Inc., that's just typical office use, is it?
Yeah, and actually, I normally remove the tenants, but unfortunately I did not in this case.
Winnipeg School Division, office,
Yeah,
and Nakanoon or Parade Grove, that is what?
I'm not sure. I believe these are office and retail rent comparables.
Okay, that's all my questions.
I don't have any questions. Take us through your submission, Mr. Smith.
Yes, I'll just point out that there was an adjustment made to reflect the daycare, which was not in the original information, so I didn't address that in my brief. We're accepting the city's valuation for the exempt portion of the property as that goes. So looking at subject property, we're again dealing with Manitoba Housing. We're in a similar location to the two properties that we just dealt with there on Langside and Young. The subject at 475 Sargent, if you look at page number 9, you can see the actual location. It fronts right on Balmoral Street, so it's at the northwest corner of Sargent and Balmoral is the location of the property. Originally built in '87, we have a total of 50 units, 36 2-bedrooms and 14 3-bedroom units for this location, so similar build out to the prior two properties. We can get into the building itself, a couple of exteriors for you on page 4 and the top of 5. And then we get into the interior and the remainder. You can see the original nature of the finishes as well as the windows. As you can see from the photos there, same flooring, same cabinetry, bathroom. If they've replaced the top of the vanity, it's through damage to the original, but cabinetry, etc. remains the same. This has not undergone a refresh, and we can move from there into the valuation. I'll be brief. We felt that the income applied to the property was fair in this instance, looking at property. So the average is $880. So we're in agreement with the gross rental income. To that, we've added the reported parking and laundry income in our valuation. Deducted the 2.6% vacancy, and it come to an effective gross of $522,431,000. Our expense stabilization is done on page number 13. As usual, you can see that the repair and maintenance is significantly higher in these Manitoba Housing properties. There is a reason for that. However, in reflecting a fair market value, we have reduced this to the upper end of the range at $1,500 a unit for R&M. This is $100,000 in R&M for the subject property versus $145,000, $150,000 in their operation of the property. We also added property management at 5% of effective gross income. So let's flip forward to my page number 18. Effective gross less our sorry, just give me a moment. Once again, I looked at the resultant expense allowance after stabilization versus the effective gross. It was too high in that it would give you an inaccurate reflection of a market value of net operating income by applying the stabilized expenses. Even stabilizing them, they would be on the high side. So we have elected to use the same expense allowance as the city has, reflecting the upper end. The greater expenses that these properties incur. So we've used the same expense allowance in fairness to arrive at a fair market value. Rather than having a much too low net operating income, we've used the same expense allowance as the city. So our net operating income, having included the parking and laundry, is somewhat higher at $220,000 plus, and our capitalization rate, in keeping with the properties that we were just looking at, is at 6%. It's of a similar vintage, similar location, similar build-out, similar condition. None of these properties would trade below a 6% capitalization rate in the marketplace as we're looking at it today. I have no doubt whatsoever that that is the case, and as you can see in our valuations, they all start at that point. When the top end of the investment grade capitalization rate range is 6%. Are they going to be below that? No, they're really not. So that is the starting point for any consideration of cap rate to which we've made any adjustments in what we've applied. So our final market value of $3,680,000 was inclusive of the property as it was originally valued. There is now an exempt portion reflecting a daycare on the main floor, which we have not addressed, but it is exempt, so I'm not going to deal with that aspect. So our final market value is $3,680,000 if you wish to add the exempt portion on to that amount. And that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, any questions?
No questions?
Mr. Whitbread, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Berensky?
Are you saying $3,680,000 inclusive of the exempt portion?
I was in that was how it was originally valued, but there was since an adjustment in the city's valuation of the property, and they divided it into an exempt portion and a multifamily portion. So it came up following submission. To my knowledge, I didn't have that information to start with. So you can add it on. It doesn't. There's no taxable portion of that exempt portion. I'm assuming it's fully exempt, so it's not something I'm going to dispute if they're not paying property tax on it.
So you're saying add 287,000 to $3,680,000
As an exempt portion, yes.
as an exempt portion.
Yes.
That's all.
Thank you. You inspected this property recently?
We have, yes.
Did you see the daycare?
I did not. This is not one of the ones that I was able to inspect myself. We had 125 properties to see, so our firm saw all of the properties, but I did not see this particular one. So I couldn't tell you much about the daycare, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. So that concludes the docket today. Would
Would I be
anybody
able to
like
just,
summation, final summation?
Quick final summation. I guess we had a lot of Manitoba housing properties today, and there are, I guess, a lot of things to consider with Manitoba housing properties, such as the very low rent or the high expenses, or whether you're even able to sell the property. So for us to try to make adjustments on all those different parts of a Manitoba housing property, it would likely result in a very low or no value. The approach that the department has taken is to treat the Manitoba housing properties as if they were a below market apartment building, and in doing so, we believe that will result in a fair value for property assessment purposes. And that would be it for me.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything, Mr. Smith?
Yes, just my very brief summary is we have taken the same approach. We're looking at fair market value, obviously, and treating them as what would this property trade for on the marketplace? What is its true value out there? So we've applied fair market rents, fair market expenses, given the properties that they are. So we're looking at properties that are in the condition they are, in the locations they are, with the build-out they have. All of this comes into play, and ultimately none of these properties are going to trade below a 6% capitalization rate. They simply would not occur, that would transact question whatsoever in my mind in that regard. That is my summation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both for coming. Thank you for your presentation. And that will conclude the hearing today.
Thank you very much.
See you again.
Try not to spill my
Thanks,
coffee.
Ken.
Didn't get it on you at least,
No, oh, that's the least of the worries.
just on
Yeah. I didn't feel anything.
I don't think